Welcome everyone to our third session of our BDTI Essentials course. It's very good to have you all here. Today we're going to be discussing data blending and storage. So let's kick in. Just if you've not been here before, if this is your first session with us, some guidelines just to keep in mind. The chat and Q&A widgets are at the bottom right of your screen. Do post sessions during the question, but if you have topic related specific questions, try to post them in the Q&A widget because there they won't be missed. We'll definitely see them and we'll get to them later on. The session will be recorded, so don't worry if you miss something or if something doesn't stick, you can rewatch it later on and it'll be available after the session. So please do participate in the chat and ask some questions. We have a dedicated discussion board. If you don't get a chance to ask your question, you can ask it there and we'll respond to it. And yes, let's stay respectful for a nice session. So if you don't see the Q&A by default, these three buttons on the bottom right should enable it for you. Let's go through the running order for the day. We're going to have a quick recap on session 2 in case you missed it, or if you just need a little reminder. We're going to go into the main topic of the day, which is data blending and storage. We'll have a chance to answer some questions at the end, and then we'll have a wrap up, which will introduce session 4. So let's get into it. Maria Claudia, I'm going to pass the floor to you to give a short introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We are very happy to see you again on this third lesson. And as you know, we are almost halfway through the BDTI Essentials course. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. You already know that this big data test infrastructure is a new infrastructure, is a program. It's basically a playground that is free for public administration, where public administration at local level, but also national and regional, can play and can try to experiment with data for free in a cloud environment. So if you go to the next slide, you probably also remember this from the previous session. What we are looking for is to have a public administration applying for the BDTI, and it's also very recommended to find maybe partnership from academia or from some private companies like startup or spin-off working in the topic of public sector innovation and data-driven public sector. You remember the process is very fast. Everything is documented in our website. Please feel free to check all the information that are available there. And if we move to the next slide, this is a quick recap about the tools we are currently offering in our infrastructure. You see, little by little, we are moving also in our training through our data journey, and we are using tools from these different, from these different components. You know that if you move to the next slide, we have behind our, training, we try to define a use case. And we want to demonstrate how to leverage this big data test infrastructure with a real use case. We have Zoe, and she's working in a team with other colleagues, and they are looking for potential partners to start together new project in the field of Green Deal and green economy, and they are trying to analyze data. They are trying to identify university to really start new partnership together. So if we move to the next slide before starting diving in our session today, you remember we start the first during the session number 1, looking around for potential information that are relevant for our use case. We found our Horizon 2020 dataset and also some other interesting dataset. Then in session 2, we try to link these different dataset together and try to transform them in a good shape. Today is going to be a very, very, I would say, interesting session, but also very, deep in terms of content. So please try to focus. We are going to blend and store all this information in the best shape to then move forward with the data analysis part. Let's now review our homework together, and then let's go to session number 3. Thanks a lot for your attention, and thanks Trinidad and Skalk for this session. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria Claudia, and welcome back, everyone. Trinidad, as mentioned, we're going to quickly have a recap of session 2 basically what we did last time, quickly look at the exercises before jumping into the blending and stories from today. So speaking of session 2, there at the bottom, we already saw that, and it's always worth repeating the process we're going through. So we have the data access was the first thing. We mentioned where we got the data sources. We did some data cleaning and transformation that we're going to recap now, and then before we go on. So why is it necessary for Zoe and your team or anyone working with data to clean and transform it?
Well, normally the data doesn't come clean and in the shape that we want. So that's the real case normally when we work with data. So why clean and transform? That's one of the reasons. So we need to get the data in the shape that we want. And also, for this, we have to identify what data we need to use. So identify the columns that we're going to work with, the rows, identify if we have duplicate values, and then make decisions upon this exploration of the data.
Exactly. And we take all the stuff away that we don't need because we need a compact data set that we can do for analysis on. So let's recap again. Cleaning, how did we do that last time?
Well, so we did it our main 3 steps. So first of all, we explored the data, which is what we did in session 1 also. And we are normally making decisions, deciding according to our objectives. So Zoe and her team, they have some objectives, they have this data. So now they look at the data and they make decisions. Then they decide to filter columns or rows. So then, for example, here we started with 25 columns in one of our data sets, and we ended up with 7 columns. This is because we filtered some columns that we didn't need, and we ended up with what we needed.
Exactly. The same for transformation. So cleaning is taking out the stuff you don't need, but then you need to do a little bit stuff with your data to get it in the right shape, correct?
Exactly. So do you remember that we wanted to get the starting years of the project, but we didn't have that column. So what did we do? We transformed the shape by extracting information from the data that we had, and then we include another column. And also we can modify information at a cell level. So that's also transforming the data to get into the correct shape.
Yeah, and we had the example with strings and data in time. Data type strings are text, just to remind you again, it's a type of data. And you have to work with apples and apples within these analytic tools. You can't work with apples and pears, so you have to put this stuff, standardize the data types and put them in the same format.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so at the end of last session, you got an exercise to do as well. This was based on Analytics platform because it's a low-code, no-code tool for beginners. Just a recap, in the first session, you access your data, and then you have these yellow nodes that where you were doing the cleaning and transforming with. In Trinidad, if the people want to find the exercises again or want to find the solutions, where do they go?
So we go to the GitLab repository where we have all the information in there. So we have the instructions, we have the different exercises. So then at home, everyone can practice.
Exactly. So let's actually go and look at the exercise review. And we're going to do 2 things here. We're going to refresh how to access the BDTI framework. Trinidad has become really proficient in that. Again, if you haven't gotten access, please go and register for it, apply for access. And if you are maybe at a university and you don't have access to the BDTI framework, remember all the tools are open source. You can download them directly and still do the exercises. Then we also want to do the exercise review. So I'm going to give over back to you. You can take over the screen and maybe go through the exercise with us just to refresh how it worked.
Yeah, so here we go. So same as always, we get into the landing page of the BDTI. Here we have all the information that we need. And when we have access to the portal, we go to the section of the BDTI portal. We access the BDTI portal. And I already registered, so I'm in the portal. And we're going to get into our landing page. So here we are on the welcome page. And we go to My Services. And here in My Services, I'm going to launch NIME Analytics Platform, which is the tool that we use in session 1 and session 2. So we just click in Open. We go to My Data, which here are all the passwords stored. So we click copy and paste our password to access NIME Analytics Platform. So here we are in our virtual machine, which is like the same as your computer, but it's in the cloud. So it's in the framework. Let's quickly open NIME Analytics Platform, and let's review the exercise in it.
Yeah, just a heads up. We're not going to do the whole exercise, so you can go download the solution there, but we're going to quickly show you one or two of the components just so that you can recap how they worked.
Exactly. So let's go on my local space and let's check the solution of exercise 2. So there we are. This is a big overview of how the workflow should look like. And let's quickly just jump in, as you said, in one cleaning part and in one transformation. So let me zoom in so that way everyone can have a look. So here we're working in project dataset. So you remember that we access the data and then we had our data that looks like this. So too many columns, 9,000 rows, etc. And then we made a decision on the columns that we needed and that we don't need it. So we add this column filter node and we include those columns that we're going to work on. And after configuring, we ended up with a table smaller. So we have only 6 columns when before we had more than 20. You remember?
Yep.
Then on the next step that we did, here we reordered our columns because here we have the row ID, contribution, so it's a little bit mixed up. And I want IDs at the beginning, the dates together. So then we picked a column resorter, and in the configuration, we decide the order that we wanted. So IDs first, then the started dates, so on and so forth. So that's for the cleaning part. So here cleaning, I'm cleaning the columns, so I filter and I decide the columns that I want. Then on the next part, we were working on the transformation. So we had to apply 2 transformations here. What I wanted, so Zoe, she needed the starting year of the project, right? So we had this column with the information starting dates. So we need to extract from starting dates the years. But first of all, we have the starting dates is on a string type. So what we did, we grabbed our string to date, date and time node, and we configure. So we pass from string to date and time. Then we grab the extract date and time fields where we decide, okay, I want from start dates, select only the year field. So then I have the year of the starting of that the project started. Then we will have an outcome of a column called year. But if I pass the data to you, you're gonna see, oh, what is this year? So then I have to give it a meaningful name that is starting year. So then when other people look at the data, they know that this column refers to the start year of the project. And at the end, we also pass other columns that we needed. For example, IDs, they were in a number, so we needed in a string type. Also with the start year for later manipulation. And at the end, we're gonna have a really nice final table with 7 columns in the order that we wanted and with the data types in the correct format. So that's for exercise session 2.
Yeah, and the same principle worked with all the other data sources we have, we needed to reduce the information to what we have and change it to the form. And this is very important because today you'll see why it is necessary to get your table in a specific form when you start blending it, right? Okay, so let me grab back the screen so we can start going into today's topics. So we did the exercise review. And today we said already, we hinted to it a couple of times, we're going to do data blending and stories. Now, these 2 themes are probably, for beginners, sounds very intimidating. Oh, you have different data sources, big tables, you have to put them together somehow. Storage, what does that mean? Exporting things, maybe working with databases. This might be very scary for beginners. But as you will see, within the framework, BDTI framework, it's actually quite easy to work with these things. So bear with us. It's going to be a couple of new concepts, but it's very powerful when you actually understand how to blend data and how to store them correctly. All right, so this is webinar 3 again. Let's just see where we are in our schedule. So we are now with webinar 3 doing the data blending before we go into analytics going forward. Again, a reminder, all the materials are in the GitHub repository. Please go have a look at it, the recordings, etc. So today's session, if people follow along, maybe rewatch the recordings afterwards, look at the slides, do the exercises, what should they be able to do?
Well, same as in every session, signing into the BDTI framework once everyone has the proper password and access to it. Initialize the tools that we're going to use. So today we're going to keep working with Dynamalytic platform, but we're going to introduce PostgreSQL as a database and the user interface, which is PGApp. Then we're going to start with the blending process of our data. So we're going to start with stacking multiple tables, so put data together. And then we're going to join into like multiple tables together, so putting information next to each other to enrich our table. Then we're going to write this data into different data files. So as we read at the beginning, JSON, CSV, etc., we're going to write the data now. And to end with the session, we're going to push this data to a database.
Perfect. And as you can see, data access, data clean transformation, and data blending, these are all the things you have to do, and it's really important. It's taken us 3 sessions so long and to do that before you get to the actual insights. So this is super, super important stuff. So let's jump directly into data blending. And remember, we're talking here about blending different data sources. Now, there are 2 main ways of blending data, and we're going to speak very high level, very simplified way of it, so you get the concept. And the concepts, once you grasp it, then whatever you're going to do with operations become a lot easier. The 2 main ways is firstly stacking. So as the word suggests, you have a table on the top, you have a table bottom. It's like a Lego block. They fit on top of each other. You stack them. And essentially what you're doing there is you're adding rows to your table. So that's the first one. The second one is you are joining tables. Instead of putting them on top of each other, you are adding, in this case, columns, more information horizontally, right? So like a train, you have the main thing in the start, and then you add compartments, which are more information about
But they all belong to the same train.
And they all are related, yeah.
Nice.
Okay, so in terms of our use case, why is blending the data, specifically when I start with stacking, why is it so important and useful for our use case?
Well, so Zoe, she's working with the Horizon project, right? So Horizon, they had a first period that is already over. So that was from 2014 to 2020. And there's a whole bunch of data from that period of the project. But now Horizon has another period, which is exactly the same. So we have the same data, but it's stored in other data files. So now what happened is that Zoe, as she wants to analyze both periods, so period number 1 and the period that is already going now, so from 2021 to 2027, she has like multiple files that they're the same. So she has organizations from the first period and from the second period, then projects for the first period and for the second period, so on and so forth. But organizations from the first and the second period, they are the same. So instead of having them in 2 data files, she wants to keep them together.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a perfect use case to understand that you want to get your data all in the same place. It's easier to work from a single or maybe 2 data sets than having 8 or 9, right? So this makes a lot of sense. So let's go in a little bit deeper with stacking here to make sense of all of this. So we said already, stacking has to do with 2 tables going on top of each other. So if we look at it in one step more and a little bit more detailed, we have, for instance, table 1 at the top and table 2 here. Now, the crucial thing for stacking is that the tables need to have the same structure. They have to have the same structure. What does it mean? If you look at table 1, it has a column for IDs. There's a column 1. We call it column 1. It could be something else, but let's say the column 1 is the name. And column 2 and table 2 have exactly the same columns. They have a column for ID, column called column 1, column called column 2. So for you to stack effectively, you have to have the columns the same, but they can just go on top of each other. So there you can see you have table 1, ID 1, ID 2. Here you have new entries, ID 3, ID 4, let's say from the different periods. And now you put them in one table on top of each other and you add more rows.
Nice.
Right? So this is really the basic concept of what it means to stack. Okay, let's go a step further. So again, for our Horizon, this would mean that we have different data sets for period 1, period 2 for organizations, for projects, and for EuroSci, and we want to stack all of them together and add the rows together. Let's look at it a bit more concretely. We have a screenshot here of the organization's data set. What's going on there, Trinidad?
Well, so here we have The data is from the period 1, as we mentioned before, from 2014 to 2020. We have 177,000 plus rows, so we have a lot of data here. And on the previous session, we already cleaned the data, so we already selected the columns. So we're a little bit, like the data is in quite a good shape to grab the period 2, which is in the same shape, and put them together.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to do with the organization data.
Exactly, and that's how important the previous step was, is transforming the data into the right shape, because now it's easy to actually stack them together. And this effectively is the same for the projects. You can see there period 1, 35 plus 1,000 rows. Obviously, period 2 is ongoing, so it has less rows. But again, we keep them in the same shape. You can see the column names are the same, so they can stack nicely on top of each other. The same for the third data set. Okay, now that we know what stacking is, the concept, we also know why it's useful for our use case, right? Let's quickly look at how you can do stacking within the BDTI framework. And here there's various tools. We already introduced in the first session R and Python, which is scripting languages if you want to program. We also introduced to you KNIME, which is a low-code, no-code platform, which we use especially for beginners. It's useful. We're also going to continue with it today. And there's also a new one. It's called SQL. It's a scripting language that you use with databases, because we're going to touch on databases. It's good to introduce it here already. And the point of this slide is just to show you that it's the same operation, stacking, but it might be called a little bit different in the various tools. Like here you see in R, it's binding rows. Here you see in Python, if you use the right library, it's called concat, union, all in SQL. Don't get confused about it. No, it's the same operation. We'll use KNIME today, which is called concatenate, but we're just stacking the tables onto each other.
Exactly.
So now that we know what it is, why it's useful, how do you actually stack? Let's go to the practical side of this. What are we going to do, Trinidad?
Well, so today we're going to just show how to stack the data in KNIME Analytics platform. So that way we keep our beginners level. And in this platform, we do 3 steps. So first, we identify the matching columns, which we already did in session 2. And then we decide how we're going to combine these columns. We're going to show it in 1 minute. And then if we have duplicate rows IDs, so it's different than the project ID, so the rows ID, we say, okay, if we want to identify them or not. Let me quickly jump into it now, so then I can show everyone how to actually do it. So we're here, that's what we did 2 weeks ago, session 2, data cleaning and transformation, and that's what we just saw with the exercise review. So here we're working on our organization's data set. So here we have organizations from the first period, and here organizations from the second period. We went through the cleaning and transformation of the data, and now we want to stack. And as you show in the previous slide, to stack the data in a KNIME Analytics platform, we have a node that is called concatenate. So let's go into the node repository and look for our concatenate node. We drag and drop. And in the 2 ports, we're going to put the 2 data. So on the first one, on the upper one, we're going to connect the first period. And in the second one, the second period. So here we're working on organizations, period 1, period 2. Same columns, different rows. So we want to add the rows. We open the configuration, and here is where we have to decide. So step number 1 is what we did. So we chose the columns. Step number 2, how we're going to combine. So here we want the intersection. So everything that matched together is going to be put together. And if we have duplicate rows IDs, we're going to append the suffix so that way we easily identify them. We click in OK, and we run it very fast. And we can see that our table now contains 7 columns and 233,000 plus rows. If we go 1 step back and we check the data from the first period, we see 177 plus rows, and from the second one we have almost 56 plus rows. And then in the end, we add all of them together and we have 2,000 plus
Exactly. All right, let me grab back the screen from you, Trinidad. Thank you for showing us as live. It's very simple to do. And just to summarize what happened there, we had the two tables. They had the same columns. You can see, for instance, here as well. And a good way to check, to validate that, hey, this made sense in the stacking process is to look at the rows. So you can see the rows here is about 177,000, about 56,000. And then you do kind of a sum and say, hey, this is sanity check. This kind of makes sense, right? This is a useful thing to always check what's going on with your data. Okay. Why do we stack? When do we stack? We stack when we have tables with the same structure. Again, the keyword same structure. They go on top of each other. And essentially, we add rows. And again, remember, the thing to remember is there's different tools that you can stack with, but
the operation is what we need to be mindful. Okay. So in SQL, it's union. In KNIME, it's concatenate, node, so on and so forth. So depending on the tool that you're working, but this operation is the same. It's just how you do it is what changed the name.
Exactly. Okay, so big picture, data blending, there's two main concepts to understand. We spoke about stacking. Now let's get to the next one, joining, right? Joining, again, is when we want to add information, but we're not stacking them. We're going to add it basically by adding columns. That's the basic concept. So here, the situation is different. You don't have tables with the same structure. It's not like the organization's data that we had there from two different periods, and now we just stack them on top of each other. Here it's different. We have tables with different structures. That means they have different columns inside of them, right? But there's something that the two tables share that you want to use as your reference and add information on this one thing that you share, right? The main category, which in our case is basically our use case is what?
Yeah, it's the project ID.
Exactly.
So we identify all the projects by this identifier. So this main category is our key column. And then from there, we're going to start adding information for the projects.
Exactly. So this is the main concept of joining. Let's look at it in a bit more detail. So we have two tables here, and you can see they have a column that's the same, which is what we want to match with each other. So it's the IDs. But here you're in table 1, you see that there's a column 1 and a column 2. But in table 2, it has a different structure. It has different columns. It has column 3 and 4. So you can't stack them, right? So what you essentially do when joining is you have your matching column, your key, the thing that is the same that you want to match by, and then you would add your columns that you want to keep, and the resulting table is an extended table with more columns. That's the highest level basic concept of what joining is. Okay, let's go a step further. When we say we're joining, what exactly are we joining?
So we're joining two tables, and we call them left table and the right table. And they both share this common category, and we call it the key. So they share a key. That way we can identify from one table and from the other one what is the information that we should put together.
Exactly. And why we're saying left and right tables, doesn't matter which tool you're really going to use, the concept is always the same. You have the left table and you have the right table.
Yeah.
And then the thing that they share is the key. And you need to identify these things. You need to tell the tool, this is what you want to join and how it goes. So let's look at another example here, right? So here we have a bit more context. So we have ID. We have the ID column, which is the key column. You can see it's the same in both the left and the right-hand table. But now you have columns here. This is column and ID and cost, but you have different columns, your store type and city. And we want to enrich and add information on our ID column, and here specifically ID1 and ID2. We want to add this information, join it together. So here you can see the result is that we have these two columns from the right-hand table slotting in next to those on the left-hand table, and you have more information on your single items. Again, very high level, very simple explanation of joining. Now, when you actually work with big data sets or any data set, you don't normally have this directly one-on-one type of relation. It's a bit more complicated. So let's quickly go through the different types of joins you get. So here you have two tables. You have your left-hand table and your right-hand table. And you can see here we have a couple of rows there. And the key in the rows is the key column we're going to use. And we have 22, 24, 15, and 10. And this 15 and 10 is exactly the same as in the right-hand table. But here you see in the right-hand table also have some rows that is not in the left-hand table. Now, if you do an inner join, you actually choose to only keep the rows that are matching in both tables. So it's very simple. You can see here that the things that match are 15 and 15 and 10 and 10. So if you do an inner join, you keep only the matching rows and you ignore the rest. Okay? Very simple. And I think that's basically what we're mostly going to do in our exercise.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's good to know that there's other types of joins. For instance, you can tell your analytics platform or tool to say, hey, I want to keep all the rows from the left-hand table, right? So now you can see it's all the rows on the left-hand table. Now what happens is the rows that are matching, you get all the information because there's some information on the right-hand table on those two rows. But then for the rows that are only on the left-hand table, what happens there, Trinidad?
We get missing values because there's no information about these rows in the other table.
Exactly. The same thing happens when you do the right outer join. You basically say keep all the rows from the right-hand table, and the ones that are matching will get information from the left-hand table, and the ones that are only in the right-hand table will then be populated with missing values. So that's now 3 types of joins. The fourth one is obviously when you want to keep all the rows. Yeah. So here you have all the rows from the left-hand side, all the rows from the right-hand side, and where there's missing information, you have missing values. It's very simple to see that.
Very straightforward.
Let's look at it at a high level again. Here you can see with these Venn diagrams, inner join, the stuff that's overlapping. Then you have the left or right outers where you have things that are in the middle that's matching, plus the table that you give preference for, the other things are ignored. And then you have the full outer join.
Perfect.
So now that we know the concept of joining, what is the basic steps? How do you actually do this?
Well, so as we mentioned, first we have to choose the matching column. So we need to identify the matching column. And here we call it the key. So we identify what is shared in the left hand and in the right hand table. And then we decide which information we want to keep. So what type of join. So as you mentioned, if we only want the matching, everything that match, an inner on the left or on the right, depending on what we need for our use case.
Exactly. And so let's look at our use case specifically. So run us through this example that we have here.
Well, so Zoe, after she put the tables together, so after she stacked projects with projects, organization with organization, so on and so forth, now she wants to enrich the data of the projects instead of having it like scattered around in different tables. So she has the project ID in both project table and organizations tables, and she's gonna join based on this project ID column. And what she did an inner join. So because she wants to keep only the information that like all the project ID has.
So again, we have 2 different data sources. We have one that's on projects and we have one that's organizations, 2 tables. Step 1, identify the key. That's the project ID.
Yeah.
Step 2, decide what type of join we want to do. We just want to match the stuff that's where they have the project IDs in both tables. And then the result is here that you have essentially more information, more columns in the output table. Now, what's interesting here, if you look, we have 7 columns there and 7 columns there, but we have 13 columns in the bottom one. What's going on there?
So here, as we saw in both tables, we had the same column with the same information, right? So instead of having project ID 2 times, we just grab from one of the tables and then the other one, we don't keep it there to avoid redundancy.
Yeah, so we could have had 14 columns, but it doesn't make sense to have the ID column twice.
Exactly.
We take it out. Okay, so we know now what the basic concept of joining is, how to do it. Now in the BDTI framework, again, we have various tools that you can actually go and do this operation with. So we're just showing you how it looks like. In R, you would have a snippet like this. It will be the inner join, specifically because we're doing inner joining. Here in Python, you would call it merge. In SQL, it's called join. And in IAM, the one that we'll show now, because it's the beginner-friendly tool, is called the joiner.
Yeah, super nice, very easy and straightforward. Let me jump into our analytics platform. So what we did before, we start organizations from the period 1, period 2, and then I also quickly did it with projects. So I also applied the same operation. And now, as you just mentioned before, we need to join those two tables, right?
And they have different structures, right?
Exactly. So then what do? We go on the node repository and we look for our joiner node, because the operation here that we're doing is to join. Then left table, right table. So we have upper port and lower port, and then we have our left and right table. And in the configuration, we start with step number 1. So checking what is the matching column.
What's
right?
the key? Yep.
So the matching key, we're going to have all the keys here, and we already know that is project ID on organizations, and that is called ID in project.
So it doesn't matter really if the column name is slightly different, because the content of those columns are actually the same in matching, right?
Exactly. And do you remember that in session number 2, so in last session, we manipulate the type, because the project ID in one was a string and in the other one was a number. So then if the types are different, we're not going to be able to join them.
So that's a good reason why you need to transform data types, because you want your apples and apples to be with each other, so that in this case you can join them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then number 2, we decide what type of join we want to do. So here we have a nice Venn diagram where if we are only including in the output matching rows, we're going to do an inner join. If we want a left, it's going to the Venn diagram is going to change to a left outer join. And if we choose the right, we're going to have a right outer join. And if we match all together, we're going to have a full outer join. That's nice to have as a visual exercise. But now we're going to do an inner join. So only the matching rows.
Because we don't want missing values in
Yeah,
outputs.
exactly.
Yeah.
We click in OK. We run this. And we're going to see in our output data. There we go, our table. So here we only have the matching rows and the columns that we want. Can you identify a mistake that I just made?
Yeah, so we already said that we have 7 columns in the one and 7 in the other, and this gives us 14. But the example in the screenshot, we had 13 columns.
Exactly.
So what's going on there?
Here we have project ID and ID, and it's the same column.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the configuration, and we can just go, and in column selection, we can select the columns that we want. And we're going to exclude IDs from project. We run it again, and we're going to end up with the 13 columns that we were expecting.
Exactly. Okay, so I'm going to grab back the screen from you. So we continue. All right, so we have now looked at joining. We have showed how it works. Step 1, you choose your key. Step 2, you choose what to join. But another interesting thing to note about when you're joining is that there's a relationship between the columns that you join. So in our first examples was easy, just one-on-one type of relationship that you can see between the columns that you join, or the tables that you join. But what's going on here in this example, just so people are aware that these relationships exist, because it becomes more interesting if you actually work later on with databases.
Yeah, exactly. So what happened here is that like the projects in Horizon, they're so big that normally one project can be developed by multiple organizations. So for example, this big project called Energy X, it was developed by University 1, by University 2, by University 3 in cooperation at the same time. So what we're going to have a relationship that one project can be developed by multiple organizations. So it's not a one-to-one like me, Trinidad, I have just one ID number, one-to-one. No, here is one project has multiple relationship with multiple organizations, because that's the way they're developed.
Yeah. And that just means that sometimes when you join, you can see there's differences in your row numbers. Maybe there's additional ones. Maybe it keeps to the one table. And it's interesting to be aware of that, hey, sometimes when you join, one thing is actually matching with multiple things. That is one example. So we already said you can have a one-on-one join, for instance, Trinidad and an ID number, or me and my address. I can only have one address where I'm living, so there's just always a one-on-one match. You can have one-to-many matches, like we have one project ID that has different organizations working on it, and then you can have the next step is obviously many sort of scenarios where the things match together.
Exactly.
So this is good to be aware of. It's not something that you need to do as a beginner level, but when you maybe get into databases, this is good to understand that when you set up and engineer your database going forward. Okay, let's summarize this. We've now spoken about data blending and what was the essential goal for our use case. Why was it important again?
Well, in Zoe's single case, she had like multiple files. So she had 8 data files actually. 2 for organization, 2 for projects, 2 for Euroscience because of this period 1 and 2, and then CO2 data, and then data from the EU countries. Too much. What she needs to funnel down, and she has now, after merging the data by stacking and by joining, a single data file with all the information that she needs.
Exactly. Instead of working with 8 files, she has now 1, and a reduced file, clean file. Now you can share it, or you can do your analytics with it afterwards.
Exactly.
Okay. Speaking of sharing, after you have now transformed and blend your data, this is now the next important step before you actually get your analytics, which is what exactly?
The data export and storage.
Yeah. And we are speaking about export and storage because you can do, the first instance, just export your file to one of the file formats we've been using, a CSV. For instance, Trinidad wants to send me an email, and she exports from the platform, from the tool you are doing, the new table that you've created, and you want to share with someone, right? Yeah, exactly. That's the one instance. What's the other example that we have?
So the other example is when things get too big, and it's not easy to have everything in one single data file. We start using what is called the databases. We're going to touch them very on a high level today, but it's good for everyone to know. And that's it. When we have too many data files, but they are still related to each other, we start using with storage our data in a database.
Exactly. So let's get into it. Let's do the easy one first, which is exporting. And again, you're exporting from your tool. You want to save that in a meaningful way so that you can access it later. You don't want to do the whole process again. You have done it. You've cleaned your data. You've combined it into one table. Now you want to save this somewhere. So maybe you can show us how to do it as a CSV
Let's
file.
quickly go live. So here we just join the information, right? So we join organizations and project. And we have this single data file. And for example, your team, they want it in a CSV format. So let's go and export the data into a CSV. And we have a node for every operation, right? And here we can see that what we're going to do is to write the data. At the very beginning in session number 1, we had the reading nodes that were in orange. Then we have all the manipulation nodes with the different colors. And then when we need to write the data, we write it with the red colors nodes. So here we have the CSV writer. So we're going to export the data here. Oh, I have a typo. So CSV. There we go. And we connect the data that we just joined to our CSV writer. We configure the node and we tell the node, okay, it's a CSV. Where do I want to store it? In my local file system. Nice. Then where inside of my local? I'm going to put it in the desktop so that way we can show it later. So we put it in our desktop and I give it a name, session 3.
Sounds good.
Session 3. We save it, CSV, and then we choose the column delimiter. It can be as a CSV comma separated value. Let's give it a comma instead of like a semicolon as we had in the beginning. We click in OK. We run our node. And while it's running, we can see, maybe we can come back to the slide if you want, or it's already. So let me quickly go in our desktop. And we can see that here is our session 3. So when we just opened at the beginning of the session, this desktop only had the Firefox and the name. So here we can see that our file is written in the desktop, in our desktop.
Basically in the location where you wanted it to be.
Exactly.
And again, CSV is recommended. So it's a more open type of file format. But there's a bunch of other file formats that you can also use depending on what you want to do. We also saw the JSON, there's the Excel, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's very useful to obviously work with CSV data within the public sector. All right, let me jump back and grab the screen so we continue towards the next topic. So exporting is part of this, is part of the what you can do. You can export it locally. You can maybe save it on the cloud somewhere that you can use it, that you can share it. But let's just recap. There's the possibility of working with databases. So why would people, again, let's just recap that. Why would they want to start using databases?
Well, as we just mentioned before, when things get too big, we have too many data files, too many tables, the data is too big, etc. We need more power, more computing power. So then is when we start using the databases. So this is for scalability, and also it facilitates the transfer of data from one file to another. Then we do certain joins, so on and so forth.
Exactly. So you're governing your data a little bit more effectively. There's some security advantages, etc. So there's a lot of use cases where it's good. What we're going to focus on mainly today is you connecting to a database and putting a table there. So let's start going closer to that. So when we speak about databases within the BDTI framework, what are the options there? What does the framework offer people?
Well, they offer different databases. In our case today, we're gonna go with the PostgreSQL, which is the object relational database, which is working with structured data, so like in a table format. But the data is stored in our PostgreSQL database, and the user interface, which is the pgadmin, that is also in the BDTI, is the user interface. So it's how we communicate with the database.
So there's two things there, the database and then the thing that's interacting with it. And we're going to launch both of these programs, basically.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
And there's also MongoDB and Minio, which is to work with our type of data.
Yeah, unstructured stuff, data lakes. So we're not going to touch on the last two. It's good to know about it if you have a use case where maybe you need to work with JSON files, or maybe it's a data lake or something like that, that really, all kinds of, images and all kinds of other stuff that you're using. Know that it's available within the framework and that you can access it if it's needed. As we said, we're going to focus on PostgreSQL today, so let's go into that. Now, within the BDTI framework, and this is where things become really, really interesting and powerful, right?
Yeah.
So remember, we have tools to do your data analytics with. We're focusing mostly on KNIME at the moment, KNIME Analytics platform, because it's user-friendly for beginners. Low code, no code, we have the other ones as well. And now we're going to use the database for. And what's very cool within the BDTI framework is these things can be integrated, right? Yeah. So you have the framework as a large thing, and then you can use KNIME Analytics platform on the virtual machine, so you have more power, computing power, and now you have the database, which is to work with big data. That's where the name comes from, BDTI, big data test infrastructure, and these things work together nicely, right?
Yeah, they like each other, like friends.
They're like friends. So let's see how this works a little bit more together. So first things first, if you want to work with the database within the BDTI framework, how does that work?
Well, same as with any other tool. So we go inside of the BDTI portal, we put our credentials, then we navigate on my catalog, and we launch the instances. For a matter of time today, we're going to keep all the information in the slides, and also in the GitLab repository, there's all the information. And then we launch our two tools here. So we launch Postgre instance and then the pgadmin, and then we connect these two. So we connect the database with the user interface, and we put the credentials that are stored in my data.
So basically the three steps are the same we did with the other teams. We're not going to do it live for the sake of time, but let's say now people have done that. They went to the catalog, they chose the two instances that they wanted to create, they launched it, and now they open the pgadmin, the user interface, for the first time. What would they be doing next?
Well, so they're going to get into the dashboard of the pgadmin, so the landing page, and then they click here in Add New Server, and after clicking on the Add New Server, you're going to have a configuration window, which is actually on our next slide, and all the information is there. You put all your credentials, there's all the steps, and then you're going to be ready to go and connect the tools.
And again, we're going through this quickly, but you can watch the recording afterwards in slides. But this is basically just credentials, nothing fancy, nothing funny there. And here's the cool part, right?
Yes. So here is where we connect the tools, where we say, hey, Naim, hey, PostgreSQL, let's talk together and share the information. So let me actually go quickly live, and we can see. So here I'm in my services, and I have Naim, pgadmin, and Postgre already working. I'm going to open the pgadmin, which is the user interface. If we actually go to dashboard, here is exactly the same picture that we have in our slides. So here's how you connect your new server, which actually I already have it connected from in advance. And now is where the magic happens. So we go in our NIME-related platform. We had our data join. We export it as a CSV, but now we connect with the PostgreSQL connector. Here, same. You open, you put all your credentials. So here is where I'm telling, hey, Naim, there's this PostgreSQL database that wants to connect with you. Okay, no problem, give me the credentials. Boom, 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 you put the credentials. And then you connect the joiner node with a DB writer node, which stands for database writer. So here we were writing a CSV file. Here we're writing a database. So what we need to do, we connect the database to our node, and then we connect the node to the data itself. And here you can see that we can stream the data from our joiner to our CSV writer, and also at the same time to our database writer. We go inside, we configure, and we can see here we're selecting all the columns from our table, and we need to give a table a name.
So basically, we're going to create a table, push it to the database, and we now need to give it a name and decide what to be in the table, right?
Exactly, which is exactly the same with the CSV writer. You give it a name, you select which columns, but here we're just connecting to a database. That's the difference. And we give it a name, session 3. Let's go with session 3. And it's connecting at this moment. So now we are writing the data to the database.
Exactly. And again, you can do this if you're using Analytics platform, you can do the same operation also within the other tools, but it's useful. And I think the point here is to lower the fear of you working with databases. I mean, if you're working with a low-code tool like this, it's very then easy to also connect to it. We'll now in a moment go to the backend or the user interface of the database and show you how you can do the stuff there as well. But the barrier of entry is very low. You can connect and write your table to the database. Very simple to do. Okay, so let me grab back the slides or the screen to show the slides. Okay, so we showed now that it's very simple to take the data that you created, the new table, connect, which is step 1, connect to the PostgreSQL database with the connector. We just say, here's my credentials, I'm going to log in, and then you were writing it to step 3 is writing it to the actual database, which is what you showed live. Now, the next step is we have written from the analytics platform, from our one tool, we've now pushed the table, wrote it into the database. But now we need to go check, and it's a very important to always check your data, right?
Yeah.
To go and check that, hey, the table that we created in the analytics platform, is it now actually on the database? You have to validate it. Is it the same data that you have there?
Do you think the data is there?
I'm pretty sure it is, but let's show the people how to go and check it.
Let me grab the screen again. Okay, so here we connect, we wrote. Let's go in our pgadmin server. And here we can see in tables that voila, we have our session 3 data written. So let's do a quickly sanity check. I'm gonna right click on top of the table, open the query tool. And from here, we don't see the data yet. So I'm not really sure if the data is written. So let me talk with the database and tell, hey, PostgreSQL, can you retrieve me all the data and just show it? Okay.
Yeah. And just give a reference here for the people, we earlier spoke about SQL as another programming language, which you use in databases. And this is what Trinidad is now using in the user interface of the database itself. He's now using SQL queries there to go and get the data. Now, again, you don't need to learn SQL if you don't want to. We'll add some resources as well in the GitHub If you are interested in that or you're already doing that, you can continue doing that. But we're showing you for the sake of transparency, this is also a possibility, but you can also stick with the low-code, no-code platform and push your data up there.
Exactly.
All right, so now that you've launched that, tell us what you did there and how do you validate your data?
So here I'm in the PG admin, and then I wrote a simple query where I tell the database, hey, give me and show me all the columns from this table. So we wrote from here, if we go and check the data from the joiner, we see this database, this data set, right? All the columns, okay, the rows, this is how it looked, project ID, name, so on and so forth. And then what we did here is that we double check if all the information is stored and actually was pushed into the database. So here we can see all the different columns that we were working with before.
And a useful sanity check is to do something like, hey, how many rows did I have, right? Is it the same amount? Hey, how many columns? Is the column names the same? It's a very important thing. Now, again, we're now in the database itself. There's queries that you can do. Maybe you can just speak a bit more about that.
Let's maybe quickly check the countries. So don't get scared at home with this query part, but we want to select, for example, the distinct country. So we want to check here how many unique countries we have from the same table, right? Session _3, which should be okay. And we are not here. Well, didn't work now. I don't know what's going on with my query in session 3. But here, while doing different queries, you can talk with the database, with the table, and telling, hey, give me this part of information. Same as when we were like grouping or filtering the column, so on and so forth.
Exactly. All right, I'm going to jump back here to the slide just to summarize what we're doing here. So again, we are just giving you a little bit of a taste of working with databases. The first skill that is important for beginners is to connect your database and then to push data to the database. In this instance, we created a table, we gave it a meaningful name, and then you go, like we said with the query, you go and actually check if this is something that you want to do, and it's good to validate, to check that the data is the same, and that you can do in the back end.
Exactly.
And again, we will put some more resources onto GitLab if you want to explore more into SQL or understand more about databases. If there's something that you want to work with, there's obviously a lot more to learn about it, relations between tables, etc. That is a useful thing that you can explore by yourself. Okay, so now that we've gone through this process, and again, I'm going to say this now and I say it later again, there's a lot what we did today, right? So we recommend that you go and look at the recordings again, go through the slides again, especially when we look at data blending, what is joining, right? How to connect to the database again. Just go and have a look at the slides and recordings. It's everything will be available. But if you do that and maybe also go look at the exercises, turning out what should the people be able to do? Let's just summarize it.
Well, to get a summary of today's session, first, signing into the BDTI once everyone has access, and initialize the tool that we use today. So to do it today, we use KNIME Analytic Platform. We open PG Admin and PostgreSQL. We connect all together. Also, we learned how to stack multiple tables. So we had 2 tables with exactly the same information, but different rows. We put them one on top of the other one, like your Lego tower. Then we also learned how to join multiple tables based on a key. So organizations had a project ID, and then project had project ID, but different columns. So we want to start our train of the project with the different information to enrich our data table. Then we wrote the data to different file formats. In this case, we just saw CSV, but here there's multiple other formats to do it. So we can do it in JSON, exporting to Excel, so on and so forth. We wrote the database, etc. And last but not least, we check how to store the data in a database. So we ingest the data, connecting the tools to store it in another platform.
Exactly. So having said that and summarize what we did today, let's have a sneak preview of what we're going to do in the next session. So again, let's see. We had the data access, the data cleaning transformation. Today we did data blending and export. And it took us 3 sessions to get to the point. And now finally in the next session, we are going to actually extract the insights of the data, which Zoe and her team need to make this decision on partnerships for the green partnerships. We prepared the data, we blended it now, got it into a correct shape so that we can go and do some aggregations on it and visualize it to start getting patterns or maybe relationships. So that's basically what we'll be doing in the next 2 sessions, setting up a report. So basic analytics, the last one is more advanced analytics, very, very interesting, cool stuff that we're going to do there as well. So what type of tools we'll be also looking at as part of the framework next week? Maybe that's worth commenting on as well.
Yeah, so we're going to keep working with NIME. Also, we're going to keep working with PG admin, so with the databases, and we're going to introduce another friend in the group of the BDTI, which is Apache Superset, which is also very nice for building reports and for nice visualizations.
Okay, so that's kind of now, we've built all these things in it. And again, this is in real life, the most time is spent on the access, the cleaning data, getting the right shape and blending it. I mean, if you don't have good data, then your insights are also not going to be good. So that's why it's so important to really master these 3 sessions, these 3 first steps, because if you want to do just visualizations quickly and stuff and you have bad data, your insights are really going to be bad.
Exactly.
Okay. So that's what you can expect from the next session. Most importantly, to acquire these skills is to practice, practice, practice. So the first thing is, and we already recommended it once, go and re-watch the recordings, go look at the slides, go do the exercises. There's additional information there. There's some extra, for instance, if you're interested in learning more about NIME Analytics platform, there's additional resources there for the other tools as well, for the databases, some SQL stuff. Go have a look at it. Where can they find it?
In our GitLab repository.
Okay. We repeat this again and again and again, but it's super important for you when you're a beginner and you're working with these more advanced topics that we're slowly getting into to go and find the resources and look at it. So again, we have an exercise prepared for you. When you download it, you will see the exercise in NIME Analytics platform. All the instructions are in there, and you simply need to follow that along. The solution is also available. So what you can do is you can go through the exercise, compare it to the solution, especially when you're going to do the joining or maybe pushing it to the database to go see what the credentials are, etc. And at that point, we want to give back to Maria, Claudia, and team to see if there's still any questions left, anything that Maria, Claudia still wanted to add to what we said today. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Skalk. Thanks a lot, Trinidad. It was a really interesting session. I think we learned a lot. And also now we have all the tools to start playing and do some analytics. That is going to be the focus of our next session. I see that there is one question in the chat. It's really about technical, I would say, technical information. Could you please show again how we can configure PG admin, also how we can configure the detailed connection for the PostgreSQL? Thank you.
All right. Shall I quickly go back to the slide, or do you want to show it live?
I think it's better if you show the slides.
Okay, just bear with me. I'm going to quickly go back to the slides. I know we went over this quickly for the sake of time, but we have 2 minutes, so let's. This is the slide, right? You can quickly discuss it there. Maybe I'll.
There we go.
Yeah, let's swap positions, and you can stand there right next to that.
There we go. So here we have all our connections. So as we mentioned before, we have, when we go through initializing the different resources, we're going to get our host name of the database, also the port that we're going to be working, which is 5432, the name of the database, and also your username. So we have everything when you connect on the BDTI and you start configuring everything, all this information is going to start popping up. So same as we did in session 1 and session 2 when we were opening NIME, for example, or R or Jupyter Notebook. So then it's also good practice, I do it personally as well, that I keep all these credentials locally. So in a notepad or, I don't know, in a Word document. So then I really know which credential belongs to which part. And then when we're ready with this, is where we connect with NAN. So here we were in NAN, and we connect with the same credentials that we had before. So we're going to have the host name, which is exactly the same. Then we're going to have the database name, which is the database name here. And here we have the username, which is the one that you give. I gave it Postgres to make it agnostic for the session. And you're going to have your password as well saved. All these credentials are in, let me come back, in My Services store with all the other credentials that you have for all the other tools that you're working with. So I hope this is clear now. So basically, we have the node, which is very similar to the configuration of the server itself.
Exactly. So thanks a lot, Trinidad. I think it's very straightforward. Let's just integrate with one important information. So in this training, what Trinidad and Skalk just show is integrated in the BDTI environment. So Sanya, if you want to do the same steps, exactly the same one, you will need to have the environment. So that's why we have this very good connection in the backend, relying on the different tools that are connected in the infrastructure. But as we already explained from the beginning, you can also download in a standalone mode each of these tools, and you can try to replicate the same pipeline in your notebook. But you find the apply process in the chat, so please feel free to submit your proposal, and we are more than happy to review it. Then I see another question that I think it's also very useful. If you can just go back, when you were joined to the different data set, you were explaining about a specific node from NIME where you can specify how to label the duplicates in the rows. Can you just try to maybe explain it again for the audience?
Yes.
Thank
Let
you.
me actually jump in straight away in the demo part. So we were here, and what we're actually saying when we want to identify the duplicate rows, but that was actually in the concatenation here. So here, for example, we have our row ID column with similar names in both data sets. So if we want to identify the row IDs that are exactly with the same name than in the two data sets, we add this suffix, which is basically a string that we add. So here we're going to append. So next to the row ID, we're going to have row ID underscore dup, which is this row name is going to be duplicated. So I think that's clear.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's useful to do because you have to tell, maybe you want to discard those. So then there's an option to say, okay, delete them. But in this case, we don't want to lose the data, so we want to just make sure that we identify which one is the duplicate. Yeah.
Exactly. So thanks a lot. I think this is very important. And also we are going to upload some nice references to SQL and let's say data manipulation in general in our repository. I don't see any other question. So I would suggest to move exactly to our last slide. Session by session, you are really becoming very, very professional playing with data. So please have a look to our website and specifically have a look to the process where you can easily apply and submit your idea. And then we are more than happy to provide you the environment if you are a public administration. Then if you go to the last slide, I think you can have a nice reminder about our discussion board. In case you have additional question or something is not clear, feel free to post there and we are going to reply in the next days. So we hope to see you in the last session. The last is not last session, sorry, session number 4, that it's about data analytics. Feel free to share this with also your colleagues. It's not necessary to have attended all the previous ones. In the next one, we are going to start building some really interesting analytics and extract some insight about our data set. Here in this slide, you find all our contact points and reference. So thanks again for your attention. I hope you enjoyed this session, and thanks again, colleagues, Skalk, Trinidad, and Kim, for your support.